Hello, everybody. Welcome to Starfleet Tactical. I am Chris Weave, and we have, as always, Pat Doyle here. Pat, is everything working okay now?
Yeah, there's a little version issue between OneDrive. Apparently, it decided it wanted to keep the old version of the file I was going to use today. So I think I found the current version. I
Okay.
just need to get it ported over to the right place, and we should be okay. But that's what I was working on for the last half hour.
Okay, and for some reason, it's showing me a previous Starfleet Tactical. That's weird. Okay, hold on a second. I always monitor it. There we go. I don't know why it moved to the other one. Okay, so Pat, what have you been up to? I haven't seen you in, it must have been 5-6 minutes.
That's true. That's true.
So hello to everybody who was in the Zoom call that Pat and I just got out of about 5 or 6 minutes ago, because Pat and I are getting ready to play. And by getting ready, I mean sometime in the next 10 years, we will actually start a game of Star Trek Adventures, which is a Star Trek role-playing game by Modiphius, a role-playing game company. And we were just having our kickoff meeting about exactly what we were going to, how we were going to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And we waited right until the wire before we switched over to do this. So,
well, we were practicing because, I mean, it always has to come down to the wire within the last couple seconds. So that's exactly how we're operating right now.
Yes. And we had it's like, really in the real world, that countdown timer, the last 10 seconds actually only lasts 10 seconds. So maybe we should take off and go do stuff. So, but in any event, that's it. That's what we've been up to. Let's see what I'm trying to think of what else has been going on this week. Work. Hello, Donnie. Work has been sort of relatively boring this past week. I want to say that there was something I was going to mention to everybody, and now I can't remember exactly what it was. I'm totally losing it. So, Lissa, for what it's worth, there's at least one person who says that they're confused because I'm on the right side and Pat's on the left.
That's true. We are on. Yeah.
I can't do anything about that. Unless one of you leaves unless Pat leaves and comes back.
No. I believe that is false. I believe you can grab and drag us over.
Oh, there we go.
The reason is because I showed up ahead of Chris, and that's just never happened before in the previous 25 minutes.
Yeah, that really is kind of what happened there. But they added a capability to StreamYard to let you because people said that we want more capability to determine where people are. And so they created the ability that you can just drag somebody over to wherever you want them. So we do not have Alec this week because, as it turns out, Lissa last week had said that Alec had internet connectivity again. And indeed, that is true for very small values of internet connectivity. Apparently what he's got is not the fiber network that I assumed what was meant by internet connectivity. What he's got is just some cellular-based internet connectivity that is sort of a temporary thing, and it has a tendency to be kind of choppy and stuff like that. And so he's going to spare us dropping out and all that other stuff. So we're hoping that by the end of the month he'll get actual internet connectivity and fiber, high bandwidth stuff, and then Alec will come back. In the meantime, we will take care of it. So my brother is sending me a series of messages. I should point out that nothing that either Pat or I say represents any employer, past, present, or future, and so keep that in mind as we go through and talk about stuff. So yes, exactly that. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you. So, Pat, what are we going to do tonight?
Well, I was going to finish up at least the original series battles that the Enterprise participated in. So then we can talk about those specific big space battles, and then we can kind of just go back and maybe recap a couple things about how Kirk fights his space battles, and kind of maybe what we see, what sort of recurring themes we see when he is in a battle situation and such for Kirk. So, tell you what, I am going to attempt to port this over and see if, and make sure that OneDrive, which of course failed me, hopefully for the last time, and see if OneDrive can get the thing working where it's supposed to. So stand by here. Let's see if we can get this to happen.
Okay, while he's working on that, let's see. I'm looking through the comments to see if there's anything. Let's see. Tim, I'm glad you're no longer confused and angry because we're now on the correct side. So good. I think that's a good thing. I was worried about you there for a minute, bud. So let's see. I'm trying to think. It's driving me crazy because I remember that I had this thing that I wanted to tell you guys, and I can't remember now what it is. So I don't know. All right, it'll come to me eventually. So DeLon, oh, I remember what it is. Seeing my brother there, it reminded me exactly what it is. So Pat, by any chance, did you see the SpaceX launch?
No, I did not. I've kind of been living under a rock, apparently.
Okay, so the SpaceX, I'm sure that a lot of you saw it. I know that my brother saw it because my brother was 6 miles away from it when it launched, which means, and it went to a 12-kilometer altitude, which meant that he was almost as close to it on the ground as the ground was. It on the ground was almost as close to him as it was on the spot that it ended up at. And it was actually pretty nifty. If you didn't see it, it's worth going back and looking on YouTube for the video of the launch. It's especially worth finding the video from SpaceX because they had a camera at the landing site and they did some high-res video that's basically looking up at the bottom of this thing as it's coming down. And so they got high-res video of everything up until the point where it hit going faster than it intended to. For those of you who haven't heard the technical explanation of it, it was basically, the test was a complete success. Don't let the fact that they actually crashed at the end change your opinion on that, because the serial number 8 was, I think Elon had said that he didn't really expect that they were going to, he said there was like a 30 or 1/3 chance that they would meet all their mission objectives. And I don't think actually landing was one of their mission objectives. I think it was all the other stuff. They got to altitude. They successfully did a belly flop. They stayed under control the entire time. They did the flip to bring the back end. They relit the engines, and they had a problem though, in that the header tank, which is the tank they use for landing, had low pressure on the fuel side, which meant that it burned oxygen rich. And if you're going to be off on that mixture, you want to be fuel rich and not oxygen rich. If you're fuel rich, you end up just dumping some unburned fuel overboard. If you're oxygen rich, you create the conditions whereby other things might burn. And so when we saw the flame coming out and the flame was green, that's not a good sign. In this case, what it meant is that it was burning the copper lining on the inside of those engine bells. And that is what is known as an engine-rich mixture, because it's burning up the engine in the process. And even then, if they would have had probably another 10 seconds of thrust, they might very well have landed it. As it was perfectly vertical as it slammed into the Texas ground. And so Boca Chica is 6 miles away from San Padre Island. which is where my brother was at the time. And so he got to see the launch and see the landing, and watch it all. So that's the other thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, because SpaceX is seriously cool. Also, in related news, there's a new video that came out from Blue Origin talking about their lunar lander and sort of explaining some of the design decisions and what that lander is capable of and how the system would work, et cetera, et cetera. And that's also pretty cool. So lots of stuff to go watch on YouTube. So how's it coming, Pat?
I think we're getting there. All right, cool. Yeah, one other little thing in space combat news, I guess, for anybody who plays on Steam, the new Star Wars Squadrons games, they just came out with the TIE Defender and the B-Wing in that, and apparently did an update that lets you set up the battles. I played it a little bit when it first came out. Lots of fun. Just haven't had time to get too deep into it, but I'm told that they put out an update for that. So, okay, now I should be getting very, very close. There. And
yeah, I was actually just typing a response to Rob's comment about most engines, including Raptor, are fuel rich. I think this one, if I remember correctly, Raptor is a little bit closer to being even than most of them. They've got that weird double fuel pump thing where they run fuel rich on one side and oxygen rich on the other side for the turbo pumps, for the fuel rich for the oxygen tank and oxygen rich for the fuel tank, if I remember correctly. And then they mix it all together to sort of even things out. That's always sort of an interesting question as to exactly how you do that. And I'm not a rocket engineer, right? I can do the rocket equation. I once spent a class trying to figure out if you can turn Polaris into a poor man's midget man missile, if you remember those systems. But I'm by no means a rocket engineer. But it's a really, really seriously cool problem and a really seriously cool design. And I've never been this excited about rockets. When I was a kid, it just seemed like, it's Elon Musk always says it's like flying a 747 to Japan and then throwing it away. And as a kid, I always understood that we weren't actually going to do anything real in space as long as we were throwing away our spacecraft every time we used it. But now we're at the point where we're not doing that anymore, and it's really seriously cool. So,
all right. So,
okay, he says it's still fuel rich in the chamber. I can believe that. I mean, you'd rather err on fuel rich than oxygen rich. Yeah, my brother points out that he got most of it recorded, but I called him at one point, in his phone, which he was using as a video camera at the time, stopped recording while it was ringing. So he missed part of it because I called him. So, are you ready, Pat?
I believe so.
Yay. Okay. Go ahead and share.
Yep. It's claims that it is sharing.
Alyssa has to do her magic.
There we go. So it's coming up right now.
I think, okay. I think you're sharing the screen and not the window.
Yeah, I haven't started presenting yet, so. Okay. All right, here we go. So, okay, so basically, for those of you who are new or maybe here for the first time, I've been going through and doing quick presentations on all the space battles that have occurred in the old series. So, and we'll perhaps move on and do the movies and that sort of thing eventually here too. So what I've been doing is I started at season 1 and we've gone all the way through. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through, interesting, that didn't update. Okay, anyhow, we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the Ultimate Computer and Elan of Troyes. We're not really talking about the Enterprise incident because there wasn't any significant space battle that happened there. But we are going to talk. Let's see here. Okay, so the first in the Ultimate Computer, as we get in, Enterprise arrives at a base, and Kirk is basically told that the crew is going to be disembarked, and in their place, they would have Dr. Daystrom and his M5 computer would take over the Enterprise, essentially. Dr. Daystrom would be there to, of course, babysit the computer, and the M5 would be plugged into the ship and essentially would start running all the basic ship functions because the crew's no longer needed. So Commodore Wesley, he tells Kirk that, hey, this is a great honor for you. Your ship is, you're the first one to get the M5 aboard. And so they're going to be running some tests. Basically, the Enterprise is going to be the fox in a hunt. The Enterprise, their Starfleet is going to be conducting war games right now. And basically 4 other heavy cruisers are going to be searching for the Enterprise and M5, and they're going to fight the Enterprise and M5, led by Commodore Commodore Wesley on board the Lexington. So that's basically the setup for the show as they get the ship plugged in, or M5 plugged in. They start running through various routine basic drills and that sort of thing. And then one of the starships makes an unscheduled attack on the Enterprise. So this is the first engagement. Now it's a mock engagement, but M5 is completely in control of the Enterprise. So, and it apparently has some advantages. It reacts faster than people, and they manage to outmaneuver the attacking ship, which is supposedly doing a surprise attack. And they get a message saying, hey, this is an unscheduled surprise attack. It's a test of M5 and that sort of thing. And during these exercises, they set the phasers to 1/100th power, so it's not enough to do any damage to the ship. And then from there, they tally, simulated damage and that sort of thing when they're doing these war games. Enterprise takes a simulated hit initially, and then M5 apparently just very outmaneuvers the other attacking cruiser and just relentlessly keeps striking it. It runs away, and that's basically it. So they award the victory for the first engagement to the M5. A little later on in the show, M5 detects another vessel. It sets an intercept course, and it turns out that this is an automated ore freighter, I believe. But M5 arms torpedoes, goes in and destroys the freighter. And they're not able to get it shut down in time. And, McCoy gives him the speech, gives Dr. Daystrom the speech that you're potentially guilty of murder here if those have been people. And Kirk actually calms him down a little bit, but it's like, M5's out of a job at this point because, M5 shouldn't be designed to go around and be a pirate ship, make them a pirate ship or a commerce raider at this point. So Kirk and company know that M5's not working well, and they try to disconnect it. And so Scotty orders one of his guys to pull the plug on it, and he gets vaporized. He's in a red shirt after all, so he does get vaporized, and they're not able to disconnect M5 at this point. So now M5's pretty much taking control of the Enterprise. And then this is another shot of one of the phaser blasts hitting the cruiser that had attacked them. So now M5's completely taken over the Enterprise, and the crew of the Enterprise cannot communicate with the attack force that Commodore Wesley is in command of. So they have no idea that M5 has malfunctioned, and that M5 is probably going to think it's a real attack, and it's going to defend itself. So during the initial part of the attack, M5 fully arms its weapons and fires on the attack force. One of the ships is completely wrecked. It's basically a floating derelict in space, and all hands are killed on board the starship. The rest of them take a little bit of damage, but they're still in fighting shape. And Commodore Wesley, basically, first he pleads with the Enterprise, "Hey, stop your attack. What's going on? What are you trying to prove, Kirk?" He doesn't understand what's happening here. And he contacts Starfleet, and he states that he still has an effective fighting force, and clearly Enterprise needs to be stopped. So his force, they gather up the other 3 cruisers, get into a good echelon formation like they learned from the Klingons apparently, and they turn towards the Enterprise. And obviously we see Lexington here in front with Commodore Wesley on board. And he intends to stop the Enterprise. Now, basically at this point, Daystrom suffers a nervous breakdown. Kirk has tried to get him to reason with M5, get M5 to shut down. Doesn't work. Daystrom has a nervous breakdown, and he gets pulled off the bridge. In the meantime, so now Kirk gets to talk to it, and we all know Kirk has a pretty good track record of making supercomputers self-destruct. So basically, he talks M5 into believing that the punishment for murder is death, and as a result, M5 shuts itself down. And once M5 disengages, Enterprise is basically helpless. She's pretty much dead in space. She can't communicate with the attack force, and so they watch the attack force coming in to attack them. Scotty calls the bridge at one point and says that he can get the shields up. Basically, it's a pretty tense situation on board the bridge. Everyone's like, yeah, we're going to die here pretty soon. And Kirk says, when asked, hey, do you want me to, you've got enough power for the shields? And Kirk says no. He decides to play dead while the attack force approaches. So he even makes an announcement to the crew, what's left of the crew on board, about 19 people on board at this point, and basically says, hey, our deaths are going to buy the survival of the other 3 ships, given what's happened. So we're just going to sit here and we're going to take it. So they are just, like I said, just sitting around waiting for the hail of photon torpedoes from the strike force. Now, Commodore Wesley on board the Lexington, as the attack force approaches, he knows that the Enterprise is just sitting there. In my mind, I kind of imagine that he read one of Kirk's reports from the Romulan incursion in Balance of Terror. Kirk could be laying a trap, but he decides not to fire on the Enterprise. Playing dead definitely falls within Captain Kirk's playbook. He always uses some level of deception in any of his engagements. But this time, Kirk did it to save lives, either his own life, the lives of the people on his ship, or the lives of the other ship, the other 3 ships coming in. And so if Commodore Wesley attacked, then that was just the price they were going to pay. So as it turns out, the Commodore Wesley decided not to fire, and as Kirk says in the end, he decided to gamble on Bob Wesley's humanity. And he knew Commodore Wesley well enough that he thought it was a good bet that that Commodore Wesley wouldn't attack. And turns out he was right. So this is interesting because at least we get to see that Starfleet does do war games. And we even saw it in The Next Generation. There was one episode where they did some war games as well. And of course, those didn't go well either. So we can almost kind of see in the 2 examples of war games we see in Star Trek, one in The Next Generation, one in the old series, something bad always seems to happen. So maybe that's why they're not a military. They don't do it very well. But that's about all I've got on the Ultimate Computer. Chris, any questions coming up about this one?
No, but I do have a little sidebar. So let me share my screen. So remember this thing? Can you see it?
Hang on.
No, I think Alyssa has to. Oh, yeah. Here it comes. No. What happened?
There we go.
No.
Yeah. So I'm
trying to share my screen.
There we go.
Probably.
You have the comment.
All right, Lissa. Okay. So remember this thing?
Yep.
This is the thing that the guy the computer, which for some reason is armed with a disintegration beam. The guy is trying to disconnect the computer using this thing, and we see this thing in a couple of different episodes of Star Trek. This thing is. I've seen this thing up close and personal, this prop, because it was part of the Star Trek exhibit that they, back in the late 80s, they did at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. And so you can't really appreciate from this photo how cheap this thing is when you see it up close and personal. The green that's there is actually more like that institutional green that you used to see painted on the cinder block walls of grade schools back in the 1970s. And it's made out of wood. It's just a block of wood that's been sort of carved, and it's not really kind of symmetrical. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, you can sort of get the impression that it's wood there. And also, they had some of the other pieces there. The bits on top are plastic. Those are plastic things. And if you, let's see if this works, it's a piece of plastic that they recycled, because these are the disruptors, the sonic disruptors from the episode with the computers that are fighting the war on the planet. And Kirk ends up going, and this is like the, I don't know, 15th, 16th time he violates the Prime Directive by making a society stop doing whatever it is that tripped their trigger. You'll notice the front of that is exactly the same thing as this other thing. And so that's one of the things I noticed when seeing all these props, is that up close, and it's clear that the resolution of television really works to their advantage. And I always think of that particular piece of gear whenever I think of the M5 computer episode, because it's like the only time we see those guys actually use it for something, and it's just so that the guy can be in the wrong place at the wrong time and get killed.
Yep, yeah, and even Daystrom, I believe he says M5 didn't know the guy was there. He was in the way when he decided to connect to power. When it decided to connect to the power, so.
Yeah, it's for what it's worth, the belts on and I know Pat's heard me say this, but everybody else hasn't. The belts on the Klingons uniforms are just your standard cloth belt, like you would see on a naval officer or a Boy Scout, right? The cloth belt with a shiny buckle. Well, shiny is bad on a set because there's lots of lights there and it throws light in weird directions. So they fixed that by cutting out a piece of bubble wrap and gluing it onto the belt buckle, and then spray painting the bubble wrap gold. So first of all, it's matte, and second of all, it's got this sort of interesting texture that you see from a distance. But up close, when you see it, it's like it's a piece of bubble wrap glued to a belt. So this is what you get in the days before high definition TV. So back to you.
All right. So the next one we're going to talk about is Elan of Troyes. Okay, is that showing up? Hey, Chris, is that showing up?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay, so the next episode where we have a battle is Elan of Troyes. And basically, the synopsis of this is Enterprise is ordered to deliver Elan to the planet Troyes, and she's basically to be the bride of the Troyan king, and this will this will end the war between the two planets, since they've determined that they've got the ability to completely wipe each other out at this point. And so they decide maybe it's best to stop shooting at each other. However, one of the problems with Elan is manners and politeness and basic societal norms. They need a little bit of work. So Enterprise is going to travel to Troyes at a very low impulse. I believe Kirk said 0.037. So I assume that's 0.037 C. So they're going to take their sweet time going to Troyes. However, while they're on their way, they detect a Klingon warship that's following them. And basically, obviously, there's various events that happen in the plot along the way. But at one point, this Klingon ship decides to provoke an incident. And they end up getting into a space battle. So basically, at one point, a member of Elan's bodyguard for a party, she sabotages the Enterprise, and then he sends, his name's Crichton. He sends a message to the Klingon ship. And the Enterprise detects this unauthorized signal coming from the Enterprise. And suddenly the Klingon ship turns toward the Enterprise and approaches at high warp. And Kirk's about to order the Enterprise to go to warp so he can start maneuvering. And just then Scotty calls up. Now Kirk had previously ordered, after it had been determined that Crichton was snooping around down in engineering, Kirk had ordered Scotty to do a complete check on the propulsion systems and figure out maybe what he was doing. So that bears some fruit at this point, where Scotty calls the bridge and he tells Kirk that any attempt to go to warp is going to destroy the ship. So the Klingon makes a high-speed pass, but it doesn't fire at the Enterprise. So clearly the Klingon's plan was to goad the Enterprise into going to warp. That would result in the Enterprise exploding. The Klingons wouldn't have fired a shot. They wouldn't have violated the Organian Peace Treaty, and they could influence their influence in this particular star system. Kind of sounds like a plan worthy of the Romulans. So, and I think it's not a stretch to say that there might be, there's clearly some cross communication between the two of them. And so who knows, maybe this was the house, maybe the commander on that ship was from the House of Duras or something like that. So who knows, could have been part of a larger plan. But anyways, so good plan, didn't quite work. They didn't cut in warp drive, and Enterprise didn't explode. So, and like we said, the Enterprise has been sabotaged. Basically, the dilithium crystal converter assembly was completely fused by the sabotage. So there's no warp power, and Scotty even says, I can't even generate enough power to fire weapons. So the Enterprise is in a bad situation if that Klingon ship decides to attack, which of course it will. So at one point, Ambassador Petrie offers Elan, actually he begs Elan to wear this particular necklace as a symbol of peace that both their people want. So she relents and she goes ahead and puts on the necklace. Kirk had told her to go down to sickbay where it was safer since they had some potential. There was some potential for combat. Now this is important in a few minutes in the episode. Now the Enterprise is on impulse engines and they're producing 93% power. and they have a little discussion about their capabilities. They can maneuver, as Spock says. However, Scotty's estimate of the situation is we can wallow like a garbage scow against a warp-driven starship. Our shields will hold for a few passes, but without a matter antimatter reactor, we have no chance. So Scotty doesn't really give them a good. Scotty doesn't estimate their chances of survival if the Klingon attacks to be very high. So the other thing is in the discussion they realize they could call for help from Starfleet, but as Fox points out, it won't get here in time. And currently, Kirk correctly surmises that would also give away their situation to the Klingons. Right now, the Klingons can't be 100% sure that the Enterprise was successfully sabotaged. So the Klingon captain would potentially be taking a little bit of a risk. And so Kirk, by not calling for help, Kirk has at least allowed himself the option to bluff. And of course, bluffing and deception are certainly Kirk's go-to tactics, which is good. You always want to leave the opponent in the dark to what you can do, if at all possible. So Kirk explicitly decides to hope that the Klingons can be bluffed and hopes that the Klingons are not prepared for a general war. He opens a frequency to the Klingon captain, and the Klingon basically tells him, Enterprise, prepare to be boarded or destroyed. And that's pretty much it. And this Klingon captain's kind of a no-nonsense guy. Kirk asks Scotty if he can get partial power on the phasers, and Scotty says not a chance. And then shortly thereafter, Elan comes onto the bridge wearing the necklace. And the Klingons make an attack run, and they make they make a pass on the Enterprise at about 100,000 kilometers away. In SFB terms, for those of you that played Starfleet battles, so it seemed like they fired at about 100,000 kilometers. They might have gotten a little bit closer. 100,000 isn't enough to be at that range in that game. The way they had ship battles set up, 100,000 kilometers was not far enough. You had to be inside 80,000 kilometers to really do some serious damage to somebody. So this was probably the Klingon making one pass at warp, testing the waters, while staying outside range, the maximum, while staying at a safer range against the Enterprise, basically, against its photon torpedoes. So that attack, it hits the shield. It's a fairly minor attack. The shield's held. Klingon makes a pass and goes away for a second. Kirk tells Sulu to keep the front shields on the Klingon. And again, that's presumably because the front shield is probably the strongest shield on the ship, or at the very least, in various game terms, it could be that that's the strongest shield. So, next, the Klingon makes a second pass. This time, the Klingon's approaching at warp 7, and he completely outmaneuvers the Enterprise once again, and hits the Enterprise on the right flank. So hits the Enterprise on the same side as the first attack. And on impulse, the Enterprise can't respond fast enough against a ship that's maneuvering at faster than light. So by definition, the Enterprise is traveling at less than the speed of light. And that means that it probably can't turn to face an oncoming attacker at warp and that warp-driven starship can certainly get around and stay out of the front arc of the Enterprise. So what the Klingon's doing is he's assuming that photon torpedoes only fire roughly in some forward arc. The Klingon is staying outside of the firing arc, coming in on a blind spot basically against the photon torpedoes, which are the heavy-hitting weapons of the Enterprise. So Enterprise takes damage to the number 4 shield, and it's stated that it won't withstand another hit. So things are getting bad. Enterprise can't outmaneuver the Klingon ship, can't get its weapons to bear, it can't even arm its weapons, and the Klingon seems to be able to hit whatever part of the ship that it wants to. So However, Spock detects a strange energy reading, and it turns out dilithium crystals. And the necklace that Elan is wearing turns out to be dilithium crystals. And she says, yeah, they're common rocks on the world. They're not really worth anything. And so now we know why the Klingons are interested in this star system. The place is just littered with dilithium crystals, which apparently is obviously it's a big deal. It's the power source for warp-driven starships. Then the Klingon makes yet another pass, and Kirk says to be ready to turn quickly to port to protect the number 4 shield. So the Klingon makes another pass on the right side of the ship. Enterprise is going to turn quickly to port to presumably, the Klingon would end up hitting maybe the aft shield or something a little farther back. Now, in old Starfleet battles terms, ships had 6 shields around them, and even the fastest Starship combat game, ships had 6 different shields around them. They were all numbered differently. You know, in Starfleet battles, the number 1 shield was the forward shield, and then it went in 60-degree chunks in a hexagon around. You'd have number 2, number 3, number 4 was the aft shield, number 5, and then number 6. And then the fastest Starship combat game numbered them a little bit differently. The front three shields were 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 would have been the port side rear shield. 5 would have been the aft shield, and 6. So the point is they throw out number designations for the various shields on the ships. There is no in-canon version of exactly which number corresponds to what shield facing they took. However, there is some evidence to suggest that number 4 might be the aft or maybe starboard type shield. So, anyways, the Klingons make another pass. They hit the number 4. Kirk tries to protect the number 4 shield. The Klingon fires, and the shields are holding but still weakening. Just like Scotty predicted, they get through the first couple passes, but it was going to get bad after that. And then the Klingons call again. They tell the Enterprise to surrender, and that is their last warning. So now at this point, impulse power is down to 31%, and the number 4 shield just collapsed, as Sulu reports. So Kirk responds and calls the Klingon up and asks for terms for the surrender. Now at this point, Kirk has sent Spock down to engineering with Scotty with that necklace to try to perhaps fit those dilithium crystals into their system and maybe get warp power restored. There's, of course, dangers in that. They don't know what it's going to do to the power system. Could just blow the ship up as far as Scotty's concerned. So the Klingon says, no terms. The surrender must be immediate. Kirk calls again, asking for guarantees that his passengers will be, guarantees for the safety of the passengers. Once again, the Klingon says, no guarantees, surrender immediately or I'm going to kill you. So after they cut communications, Sulu's told to prepare for warp maneuvers. Kirk is betting that that warp power is going to be restored. Chekhov is told to arm photon torpedoes. They've got it set up. They've got the dilithium crystals in place. They've got some power, but they don't ultimately know what the effects are going to be. But Chekhov is told to arm photon torpedoes, and Sulu asks about reinforcing the front shield. Adding warp power to the front shield to make them stronger. And Kirk says no, because he wants to maintain the deception that they are essentially crippled and helpless without warp power. So Kirk says, here's the plan. We're going to pivot at warp 2. We're going to fire a full spread of torpedoes as the Klingon passes. So Enterprise is still going to have to endure the next pass, but he's got a plan for shooting at the Klingons after they pass. The Klingon makes its final run. The D7 takes a shot from farther out, and then they get in a little bit closer and make a second shot. And Enterprise takes the hits, but Kirk orders warp power. He orders full power to the shields. And in Starfleet battles terms, that would have been you could take your warp power and you can allocate it to that front shield and make it really, really strong. And so Kirk probably reinforced the shields right before it was hit. And as the Klingon passes by, Kirk fires a full spread of photon torpedoes down into the Klingons, and as Sulu said, direct hits in midship. So he got probably all the torpedoes to hit, and it says the sensors report that they lost the number 4 shield, which was obliterated. In Starfleet battles, that would have been the aft shield, which does make some sense given that the Klingon ship had just passed by. So the Klingon ship's passing by at warp. Enterprise cuts into warp, fires photon torpedoes, which, you know, in this case, probably by accident, this kind of really did stay within the next generation tactical manual specs, in that you fire photon torpedoes at warp. So Enterprise fires torpedoes, they hit, obliterates the aft shield, damages the number 3 shield is what they said, and the Klingons had lost maneuvering power. So and typically, at least again, I'm going to reference Starfleet battles because they had a really good setup on this stuff. The aft shield on a Klingon ship was paper thin, and so all the fully powered photon torpedoes would really wreck a Klingon D7 if you got them all to hit on the aft shield. So the Klingon's badly damaged. So Enterprise resumes course for Troyes and continues its mission. And of course, Elan is like, "Hey, you're not going to blow them up?" Kirk says, "Nah, that's not really our thing. So if I can accomplish my mission without killing that Klingon ship, then that's what we'll do." And that's obviously holds true within with the Federation values and all that sort of thing. So that's pretty much it on the battle. I will escape out of that.
So,
yeah,
a couple of thoughts. The first one is that I have not watched the remastered series, so I don't know. But I did notice from those shots that they've clearly gone to having the ship shown in the same frame.
In one of those shots, you saw the Enterprise turning left with the Klingon coming in on the other side. That was 2 separate pictures I actually put next to each other.
Oh, okay. In one of the other things, though, like the M5 episode, you see them in the same frame. So there seems to be more of that, at least. And so in any of the rest of that, when they're moving at warp speed, do you see them in the same frame? Did they screw up and put them in the same frame when they're moving at warp?
Yeah, and these are the remastered ones. So.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I noticed is that it really comes out in the remastered ones. If you go back and you look at Franz Joseph and a lot of other places that, like the making of Star Trek Whitfield's book and stuff like that, I think I previously said that Making of Star Trek was done by David Gerrold. It wasn't. It was done by a guy named Stephen Whitfield. That's actually a pen name for somebody else, and he was actually very involved in it. He's as close to a canon source as you can get and not actually be on a screen. But if you look at all the places where they show drawings of the Enterprise, the secondary hull has these curves to it. But if you actually look at the model, and if you actually look at, they got it accurate to the model in the remastered version of it. It's not. It's just a cone. The secondary hull is just a cone with a scallop out at the end.
Okay.
But the rest of it is just a turn of body revolution cone shape. It doesn't have these curves and stuff that you see in all the blueprints.
Okay.
So, and I will admit, I was 55 years old before I realized that, and had to read it before I realized that, which means I figured it out about 2 months ago. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So do you have another episode?
Nope. That pretty much sums it up. The only other thing that occurred, and there really wasn't a good battle or anything out of it was the Enterprise incident, where Kirk appears to be kind of losing his mind a little bit, crosses into the neutral zone, and a Klingon, or I'm sorry, 3 Romulan ships surround the Enterprise. 2 are Klingon design, and one's a Romulan bird of prey. And one of the things they talk about in there, there are moments where I think that that whoever wrote this had not watched Balance of Terror, because they talk about the cloaking device, and Kirk's asking them, "Hey, your sensors didn't detect any Romulan ships, and suddenly they appear out of nowhere. What's up?" But then I thought about it a little bit. In Balance of Terror, the Enterprise at least had a vague idea of the presence of that ship, and they could follow it and track it a little bit. Whereas in Enterprise Incident, these Romulan ships are fully cloaked and appear out of nowhere, and the Enterprise didn't get any hint that they were even there at this point. And so perhaps that was a development in Romulan cloaking technology at that point, whereas, perhaps in Balanced Terror, what we saw was some form of stealth device, lower level stealth device, but then they had a full blown cloaking device by the time we get to Enterprise Incident. So, and anyhow, at that point, Enterprise Kirk steals the cloaking device. They get it aboard the Enterprise. Scotty installs it. Romulans are given chase. The only interesting thing there that happens as far as weapons firing goes is, as the Enterprise is cloaking, the Romulan subcommander says, calculate, their speed and trajectory and fire on that position. And they do. But Kirk also knows that, hey, if I don't change course, all they have to do is plot where I'm going to be in a few seconds and start shooting at me. So Kirk changes course. So they both did what they could do, given their, in their situation. They both did the correct thing. So, and Enterprise gets away.
If you've ever spent any time trying to find a submarine, that's the sort of shit they do. If you're going straight and you go sinker, you immediately do a course change. And maybe a speed change also, so that the follow-on circle becomes a little bit harder.
That's right.
So
I have been in the ASW team trainer out in San Diego. Spent a week there.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Sorry, ASW, for those, it's anti-submarine warfare.
Yes. So back in a previous lifetime, when I worked at the Center for Naval Analysis, I was a war game designer and the crazy guy you could get to go ride a ship on 2 weeks' notice. And by ride a ship, I mean like 2 weeks at sea and then 2 weeks ashore doing an exercise reconstruction afterwards. And I was an ASW guy. I spent a lot of time watching the U.S. Navy trying to find submarines and exercises. So, and not always U.S. submarines. Sometimes they were Allied submarines. So a couple of things that come to mind. One is about cloaking devices. I'm remembered there's that great episode of Next Gen. I think it's the second episode with Andreas Katsoulis as the Romulan commander. And they've got the Enterprise surrounded, and at which point, at the appropriately dramatic time, Picard says, "Mr. Worf," and Worf sends a signal, and all these Klingons drop out of cloaking device, and now the Romulans are outnumbered. And one of the things that always sort of comes to mind about that is, you would think if there was anybody out there who knew how to find a cloaked ship, it would be the Romulans, because they know what the limitations are. They know, you would think that they would be better at it, and yet he's totally surprised.
Well, maybe the technology is just that good.
Or the Klingon technology is a little bit different, or the Klingons are just better at it.
Well, I doubt the Klingons are better at it, but at least in the Enterprise incident, the Romulan commander confesses that even Romulans can't detect their own cloaking device. Now, of course, this is 100 years earlier, but if those capabilities get extrapolated out, then Romulans can't can't detect it either. Probably the Romulans might not have been expecting it either. Maybe they weren't looking real hard for the Klingon ships.
Yeah, they were too busy,
like, oh, we got him now.
Don't start celebrating before you get the football across the goal line.
Exactly. It's very important. If the enemy's down, you kind of want to keep kicking them just to be safe.
The other question that comes to my mind, there's a bit of a discussion here about, I think Jim Westbrook called it the episode is The Defector, and I think that's correct.
Yeah.
And Michael, yes, the Romulans did sell the Klingons cloaking tech in exchange for some ship technology way back in the day. In the remastered episodes, there was a little bit of a discussion here about what the proper shape for deflector shields are. So how did I assume that they actually sort of show in the original series, a lot of time when you had a hit on deflector shields, you just sort of had this bright flash of light, as opposed to something that looked like a solid, like a shape to the deflector shields. Do they show shapes to the shields in this?
Let's see here. So it says I am not sharing. Does this show up?
Okay. Yeah. Now it does. So that's the sort of stuff they're showing.
Yeah, that's a shot in the remastered version. I believe this is Errand of Mercy, where the Enterprise is attacked by a Klingon scout ship. And now what the Klingons are firing are magnetic pulses. So it's the only time I think we hear the Klingons firing magnetic pulses in the franchise.
What does that mean? I don't even know what that means.
I don't even know what that means. But hang on, there's one other good one. Here we go.
It does remind, okay, that's interesting. It does. The magnetic pulses does remind me of Spock's brain.
Yep.
It's a nuclear pile 100 miles across, or what, Scotty? Ions, sir. It's like, we'll just use some sciencey words and it'll be okay.
It'll be all right. So this is in the Deadly Years. This is Enterprise getting hit by a Romulan plasma torpedo. So, but you see the effect is the same in both.
Yeah.
In that there appears to be a little bit of a bubble out in front of the Enterprise. These are the remastered versions, of course.
Yeah, and that's a lot different than what you see in Next Gen, where most of the time shots are enough to sort of cause the entire shield to fluoresce, with there being more at the point of impact, but you see it actually, you can watch it sort of curve around the ship.
Yep.
And you can get a pretty good idea of what the shield shape is. So it's always interesting looking at the special effect decisions that they make in this. So I would have
gone a different way on a couple things. Like they could have actually fixed a few items, but anyways, they made the choices they made with the budget that they had. So
yeah, Tomalak,
Admiral Tomalak. Yeah. Yep. It was. We got to see him recurring several times in Next Gen. That was good.
Yeah, somebody made a comment about the Klingons getting forehead ridges, which is Pat's heard this screed before. I can't remember if the rest of you had, so I'll go ahead and do it. It always annoys me that it first of all annoys me that for the sake of a stupid joke in Deep Space Nine, that they do we don't talk about it and stuff, rather than just acknowledging the fact that it's a TV show and the special effects got better over time. They have to come up with some reason to explain why there isn't forehead ridges, despite the fact that Klingons had already shown up on the station and they had no forehead ridges in the original show. And when they came to Deep Space Nine, they all had forehead ridges. So they aren't even internally consistent across like 3 seasons or whatever it was. So
yeah, well, and we saw Core in Errand of Mercy, and then we see him later in Deep Space Nine. So with the standard ridges and everything. I guess I don't mind the explanation that they did in Enterprise and stuff. I thought it was all right. I mean, but yeah, could they have done some better episodes with that effort rather than explaining, a special effects thing that happened 40 years ago?
I don't really blame them in Enterprise, because by the time that Enterprise rolled around, they had already sort of committed to the stupidity. Deep Space Nine, where they made the decision to double down on the stupidity, that I really kind of have a problem with. And I just realized that all three of those actors who played the Klingons, they've all passed on.
Mm-hmm.
And they all three did some great work.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course the one guy whose name I can never remember was also the Squire of Gothos.
Oh yeah. I don't remember his name, but you're right. He was Squire of Gothos, and he was the Klingon in trouble with tribbles.
Yes. And then you've got John Kulikos, who also played Baltar, and you've got Michael Ansara, who also played
Kane and Buck Rogers.
Well, Kane and Buck Rogers, but I was going to say Elric in Babylon 5.
Oh yes, the Technomage. Yep.
He was the head of the Technomages.
Yep.
So, Trelane is the name of the character, but I can never remember the name of the actor.
I don't know his name. So
but that's really just such a. They were all three really great really great actors.
Yeah.
So.
Next time, or in upcoming things, we might talk about something
William
about
Campbell. Jim Westbrook says it's William Campbell.
Oh yeah, okay. We might talk about. We'll kind of maybe wrap up, talk about Kirk, and maybe even talk a little bit about Wrath of Khan. But chances are, if you're like me, every one of us has seen Wrath of Khan about 150 times. So, but it might be fun to go through Wrath of Khan and talk about that. And then I just want to talk about Kirk and and kind of wrap up the different tactics he uses, and pull the thread on a few things with Kirk and as a ship captain. So, and that's it.
Just to remind everybody, the way that Pat and I are kind of approaching it these days is because Pat's schedule has gotten less predictable, shall we say, with him spending more time in the cockpit and less time with his wife and family. As a result of that, basically, Pat has the right of first refusal on any day. So when Pat's available, Pat's going to probably be the guy running with it. But if something gets in the way of that, then I will jump in, and it'll all even out in the end. I've been working on something called naming and typing. So in the real world, the Akula class submarine, for instance, the Russians have a submarine that they call the Akula class. We call a particular Russian submarine an Akula class. They are not the same submarine. So how does that happen? Who makes those decisions? And there's also a typing piece of that, because, like, for instance, if the Office of Naval Intelligence did typing analysis for the U.S. Navy, most U.S. Navy submarines would be considered SSGNs. We wouldn't consider them SSNs. They would be guided missile attack submarines, not attack submarines. And so there's some interesting things there, and I'm at some point I'm going to talk about all that and try to relate it to the Star Trek. So that's I've got that queued up. So with that in mind, that's where we're going what we've all discussed here will probably take us through the end of the year, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, it's not very many left.
Yeah, that's not that long. It's not that long. So, but I think that's it for us tonight. Do you have any final parting thoughts, Pat?
Nope. Thanks, Lissa. Appreciate it. Appreciate all your help.
Always. All right, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Alec, if you're watching, we miss you.
See you, Alec.